Hello and welcome to BYJU'S IAS. Let's get started with the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper, beginning with Kashmir, the single issue, says Imran Khan, the Prime Minister of Pakistan. Now, yesterday there was a groundbreaking ceremony for the Kartarpur corridor, which we have discussed in the past. At this groundbreaking ceremony were present Punjab Minister Navjot Singh Sidhu, Indian representatives from the centre Harsimrat Kaur Badal, Hardeep Singh Puri, and there was a speech by the Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan. And in that speech he said that we are willing to have peace, dialogue and negotiation to resolve all outstanding issues with India, but Kashmir remains the single most important issue between India and Pakistan. From the civil services point of view, we need to understand what are these other issues between India and Pakistan. One such issue is Siachen. Siachen is the world's highest battlefield. The costs of keeping army at Siachen are huge, both for India as well as Pakistan. The weather is extreme at Siachen, and we have also lost many of our Jawans at Siachen because they could not adapt to the weather at Siachen. There was a talk when Pervez Musharraf was the president of Pakistan. He held negotiations first with the Indian Prime Minister Mr. Vajpayee, then with Dr. Manmohan Singh, and there was a talk that we should demilitarize Siachen. Nobody should be present at this glacier in Siachen, and ultimately this deal could not go through. There were apprehensions from the Indian side where the Indian army was not in the favor of demilitarizing Siachen. So that is issue number one. Second is the issue of most favored nation status that India has given to Pakistan, but Pakistan has not given the status of MFN to India. Third is Sir Creek. Now Sir Creek is a tidal estuary of the coast in Gujarat, and it borders the Sindh province in Pakistan. There are claims and counterclaims on Sir Creek by both India and Pakistan, and even this issue is unresolved between India and Pakistan. Although this is one of the most easiest issues to resolve because both sides agree which line demarcates Indian and the Pakistani side. And Sir Creek is considered to be one of the most important fishing areas in the entire Asia. It is also considered as a source for shale gas, which is now considered as an alternative to the petroleum products. This is another issue which is unresolved between India and Pakistan. On top of that, we have seen unresolved issue is that of terrorism, which is emanating from the soil of Pakistan, and Pakistan has done very little to control its deep state, which is the army and the ISI, because they have been waging proxy war against India and using terrorism as a foreign policy tool when it comes to India. There are other issues, for example, Afghanistan, where Pakistan already has an influence and India is trying to gather feet and control some part of Afghanistan's policy, in a sense that India wants to become a very important player in Afghanistan arena. And this is where Pakistan does not want the involvement of India in the peaceful talks that are going on right now in Afghanistan and on Afghanistan. So these are some of the sticking points between India and Pakistan. So Kashmir is not the only issue between India and Pakistan. That's one thing that you need to understand from the civil services examination point of view. Now let's come to another important issue on page number 1 of the Delhi edition of the Hindu. What is GDP? GDP in simple terms is the monetary value of all the goods and services that are produced in India, but that are produced in India domestically. That means within the territory of India. What is the monetary value of all the goods and services produced? That is what we call GDP. And to calculate GDP, we need a base year. This base year used to be 2004-2005. But what the central government did in 2015, it changed this base year from 2004-2005 to 2011-2012. On top of that, we shifted from GDP to gross value added, GVA. Now you would have understood what is the difference between GVA and GDP. And if we look at this GVA, The government has used this methodology of GVA to calculate the economic criteria or the economic strength of this particular country. And according to the recent figures released yesterday, the government has said that India never touched 9% high growth phase in the years of UPA 1 and UPA 2. That means when UPA 1 and 2 projected the growth rate of 9% or 10% during some quarters in their rule, now the government has said that we never touched 9% high growth phase in the years of UPA 1 and UPA 2. Already there has been a political controversy over this government claim, and many people argue that this is a political way in which the current government wants to discredit the previous government. But very briefly, for those who do not understand the difference, GVA plus the taxes that are imposed on products minus the subsidies that are provided on the products, that is equal to the GDP. So GDP is basically GVA plus the taxes and minus the subsidies. But this GVA, it gives the picture of the state of Indian economy from the producer side or from the manufacturer side. And GDP gives the picture of Indian economy from the consumer side. This is a very important statement and can be a potential statement for your prelims examination. But why did the government of India adopt GVA instead of GDP? Because if you look at this GVA, it gives a sector-wise picture. For example, what is the growth in construction? What is the growth in manufacturing? What is the growth in health? What is the growth in education? So on and so forth. So GVA gives a sector-wise picture, like what is the growth in an area, in an industry, in a sector. And this sector-wise picture helps the policy makers. Helps the policy makers to tailor some of the plans, schemes and programs for that specific sector which is not performing well, or which is performing well but we need some additional policies and programs. That is why the Indian side adopted the GVA model, because it gives a sector-wise picture and it gives a picture or state of Indian economy from the producer side. That is what you need to understand from this newspaper article. Now let's look at another issue on the same page, number 1. Death penalty freakishly imposed. One of the senior-most judges of the Supreme Court, Justice Kurian Joseph, has said that we are imposing capital punishment or death sentence on the convicts in an arbitrary manner, in a freakish manner. And it goes against the precedent set out by the Supreme Court itself. That means in Bachchan Singh versus State of Punjab, way back in 1980, when Supreme Court said that death sentence should not be invoked in all cases, but death sentence should be invoked and imposed only in the rarest of the rare cases. And this doctrine of the rarest of the rare has been arbitrarily used by the judiciary. That is why some people say that Supreme Court might seriously consider putting a moratorium or a temporary ban on the capital punishment in this country unless and until this doctrine, rarest of the rare, is clearly defined by the judiciary. Because as of now, there is no definition of what constitutes rarest of the rare case. Because we have seen that in similar cases, different punishments have been imposed. For example, I gave you the example of Moninder Singh, who raped his own daughter but was awarded life imprisonment. When he was serving his life imprisonment in jail, he was released on parole, and while he was on parole, he killed the same daughter he had raped as well as his wife. But Supreme Court said this is not the rarest of the rare case, because Moninder Singh may be a threat to his family, but he is not a threat to his society. That is why we should impose life imprisonment on Moninder Singh. On the other hand, we saw the kidnap and murder of 7-year-old boy. And when the judiciary heard this petition, the accused was sentenced to capital punishment, death sentence, because 7-year-old boy was kidnapped and then murdered. So it is the difference in outcome in similar cases that begs the question that capital punishment is arbitrarily imposed in this country. That is what Justice Kurian Joseph is highlighting. And if you want to look at this entire concept of death penalty in detail, there is a YouTube lecture recorded by me available on our YouTube channel. Please go through that. Now let's look at another issue. High Court upholds conviction of 70 in anti-Sikh riots case. Now from the Society of India, which is part of your GS paper 1, this becomes a relevant question. How? Operation Blue Star. This was carried out in Punjab. Why? Because there were Khalistani terrorists present inside the Golden Temple, inside the Akhal Takht of the Golden Temple. Who were these Khalistani terrorists? Basically, they wanted a separate independent sovereign state for the Sikhs called Khalistan. And one of the prominent face of this entire movement was Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale. Bhindranwale was also present inside the Golden Temple when the Indian Army, on the instructions of the Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, they entered the Golden Temple in Amritsar and killed these terrorists. Many people were offended by this military operation inside the Golden Temple, particularly the members of the Sikh community. They thought that the Golden Temple has been desecrated because the blood has been spilled inside the Golden Temple. One of the Sikh bodyguards of Indira Gandhi, the then Prime Minister, he assassinated Prime Minister. And then when Indira Gandhi was assassinated, there were riots that broke out in different parts of the country, particularly in Delhi. And the members of the Sikh community were targeted, individually attacked, they were burnt alive, their property was destroyed, and that is what we call the AntiSikh Riots or pogrom in 1984. Many people say that these riots, in which prominent members of the Congress party were alleged to have participated, for example Kamal Nath of Congress, Jagdish Titler, Sajjan Kumar of Congress, many people have also dragged the name of Bollywood megastar Amitabh Bachchan for instigating the rioters. Many people say that these riots were also justified by the then Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi when he gave a very controversial speech wherein he said, when a mighty tree falls, the earth under it shakes. So it was a justification for the anti-Sikh rioters of 1984. And now the Delhi High Court has upheld the conviction of 70 in these anti-Sikh riots case. And many people, particularly from the Sikh community, they feel relieved that at last the justice has been delivered in this case. After the gap of 33 years, finally the wheels of justice have been set in motion. Now let's look at news on page number 7. Lancet urges response to heat wave exposure surge. Indian policy makers, according to Lancet Countdown 2018, Indian policy makers should take series of initiatives to mitigate the increased risks to health and the loss of labor hours due to surge in heat wave exposures. For example, heat wave exposures. India has been exposed to almost 60 million heat wave exposure events in 2016, which is a jump of 40 million from 2012. And due to these heat wave exposures, people are dying, labor hours are lost because ultimately people cannot work under the sun exposed to this heat wave. So it becomes relevant for your GS paper 3, which talks about environment and ecology, which also talks about disaster management. But it can also be relevant from your GS4, which is ethics, integrity and aptitude. And case studies can be formulated on the basis of this Lancet Countdown 2018 report. How? For example, I'll give you a case study. You are head of a district. The government has issued an advisory that it is going to be a period of intense heat wave for the next 15 days. You are head of the district. What are the steps that you can take to prevent deaths due to heat exposure? So this is the case study that is provided to you. And this case study talks about that you are head of a district. The government has issued an advisory that it is going to be a period of intense heat wave for the next 15 days. What are the steps that you can take to prevent deaths due to heat exposure? Now, what are the steps that you can take? Number one, some people will write about awareness. But if you want more marks in the examination, you have to explicitly spell out what and how can you create an awareness about this. So you can write awareness through All India Radio because that is mostly heard by people in the rural India. Awareness through digital medium. We can use the social media to create awareness. Second, we can make drinking water readily available at multiple locations. But to get more marks in the examination, you can also write that we can make ORS solutions readily available to the people. Third, there are public parks at multiple locations in this country. But mostly these public parks are closed during the day. Why can't we keep these public parks open during the day so that rickshaw pullers, traffic policemen, they can rest under the shade for some time and they can be prevented from being exposed to the heat wave? That's another step that you as a district collector can take. Similarly, can't we change the school timings so that children are brought back to their homes before 12 noon when the sun is at its peak? That can be another step that you can take. Similarly, Manrega work, Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act. This work should be stopped for a period of 15 days when there is an advisory that it is going to be a period of intense heat wave for the next 15 days. Since we cannot prevent the exposure of workers who are carrying out Manrega works, that is why there should be a ban on Manrega work for the period of 15 days. And if you write this in your answers, the evaluator will think that you know the law as well. You know various schemes as well. That is why you will get more marks in your case studies. That is why this topic becomes relevant for your GS paper 4 as well. So that is what you need to understand from this newspaper article. Now let us look at some of the editorials and columns from today's newspaper, beginning with the dire strait. Russia must be persuaded to lower tensions with Ukraine. In our yesterday's newspaper analysis, I told you the brief background of what is the controversy between Ukraine and Russia. And I told you how the foreign powers may be tempted to get involved in this. Ukraine wanted more integration with European Union, but Russia wanted the dominance of Russian influence over Ukraine. That is how one of the autonomous area of Ukraine, Crimea, was annexed by Russia. And now we saw the 3 naval ships of Ukraine were captured by the Russians, and Ukraine president, with the permission from the parliament, imposed a martial law in Ukraine. Now there are tensions between Ukraine and Russia, and this editorial says that the world powers must persuade Russia to lower tensions with Ukraine. This editorial also talks about that we should divorce politics from the conflict. How? The president of Russia, Vladimir Putin, his popularity has soared after his conflict or confrontation with Ukraine. So his acceptability amongst the Russian population has increased up to 80 percentage points. On top of that, we are going to witness presidential election in Ukraine next year. And in all opinion polls, they project that the current president of Ukraine is going to lose this election. So this editorial says that maybe the Ukraine president wants to use this confrontation with the Russians to increase his popularity and win the next election. That is why this editorial calls for caution that politics should not trump the diplomacy, and elections next year should not determine the confrontation between Russia and Ukraine. So in all likelihood, humanitarian situation arising from the continuing conflict brooks no delay in arriving at a speedy resolution. That is what this editorial talks about. There is another beautiful column written by Aditi Priya. She is a student at Delhi School of Economics. She talks about the maternity benefits. Now, if we look at the National Food Security Act of 2013, it talks about maternity benefits that should be provided to the pregnant women. And this maternity benefit is pegged at 6,000 rupees. But this 6,000 rupees should be paid every 3 months. That means we follow trimester system. At the end of 3 months, pay 6,000 rupees. At the end of 6 months, pay 6,000 rupees. At the end of 9 months, pay 6,000 rupees. So these 6,000 rupees should be paid at the end of every 3 months. But when this National Food Security Act was implemented, we saw that in 2016, Prime Minister announced another program called PMMVY, which is Pradhan Mantri Matru Vandana Yojana. According to this Yojana, now the maternity benefit should be provided, which is not 6,000, but reduced amount of 5,000 rupees. And this 5,000 rupee will be paid only for one child. And this 5,000 rupee will be paid only to a woman who is pregnant but who is above the age of 18 years. Now what this column talks about, it evaluates the performance of this Pradhan Mantri Matru Vandana Yojana. And particularly it is analyzed in Jharkhand. And Aditi Priya says that this scheme may not be working on the ground. Why? Because majority of the births, 43% of the births are first order births. That means these are the first child of the parents. Remaining are second births, third births, so on and so forth. So if this yojana is only for the one child, that means majority of the pregnant women have been excluded from the scheme. On top of that, what about those women who are below the age of 18 but are pregnant? This scheme is not applicable to them. On top of that, the application process is very cumbersome. How? You have to fill the application at every 3-month interval. You have to fill this application linking your Aadhaar with it, linking your husband's Aadhaar with this, and ultimately this linking of Aadhaar is also proving to be exclusionary. There are some pregnant women who are not in a position to link their Aadhaar with the application process, and that means they will not get this maternity benefit. So what this column basically talks about, it says that we should enhance the maternity benefit to 6,000 rupees, which is a statutory right under National Food Security Act of 2013. And this maternity benefit should be provided not only to the first child, but to all pregnancies, whether it is second pregnancy, third pregnancy, so on and so forth. And that is what this column is all about. Now let's look at another column on page number 9, Protect Indigenous People, written by Venkat Narayan S. This is in context to the killing of US citizen who was killed by the tribal people in the North Sentinel Island in Andaman and Nicobar. What this column basically talks about, it talks about that from Nehru to now, our policy has shifted somewhat. For example, the tribal Panchil policy that we discussed in our previous lectures, which talked about that we should not force these tribals to become second-rate copy of ourselves, that these tribals should be allowed to develop along the lines of their own genius. This policy has somewhat been flirted with by the recent governments in the past few years. How? We have seen how Andaman Trunk Road has ensured that there is increased interaction of the tribals with the outsiders. We have seen how Jarawas, which is a protected tribe in Andaman and Nicobar Island, how this Jarawa tribe, how their people have been sexually exploited, how these tribal safaris have forced the interaction of these tribals with the outsiders. That means from our policy of non-interference, from our policy of non-integration, now we have seen a policy where we are getting closer and closer to these tribal people, and we are somewhat neglecting the old tribal Panchil of Pandit Nehru. This column also talks about that there was an Indigenous and Tribal Populations Convention of 1957. This convention was that of International Labour Organization. This convention insisted that we should have an integrationist approach. That means we should integrate these indigenous and tribal people with the mainland people. This convention was ratified by the government of India. But then subsequently in 1989, this convention was revisited. This convention now said that instead of going for an integrationist approach, we should go for non-intervention approach, non-integrationist approach. That means we should not try to integrate these tribal people with the mainland population. India has not ratified this new convention. And that is what this column says, that we should ratify this new convention and we should revisit our policy where we should not try to integrate these tribal population with the mainland India. And we should look at this term development from the perspective of the tribals rather than from the perspective of the people of the mainland India. That is what this column is all about. Now let us look at some of the prelims based questions. Which of the following tributaries are correctly matched? Map the following question. Gomti, Ganga, yes. Panchaganga, but this is a tributary of Krishna. Musi, Krishna, yes, correct. So which of the following tributaries are correctly matched? It is 1 and 3. C is the correct answer. And this is the explanation. Panchaganga is basically a tributary of Krishna. Previous year's prelims based question 2017. What is the importance of developing Chabahar port by India? Because of this, India will not depend on Pakistan for access to Afghanistan and Central Asia. Let's look at a mains based question and the answer should be in less than 250 words. There is an urgent need for a renewed political debate on federalism and the institutional framework through which center-state relations are negotiated. Discuss. What is the context? The context is the recent dissolution of Jammu and Kashmir Legislative Assembly by the Governor of Jammu and Kashmir. If we look at increasingly what we have seen, that there was a same party at center ruling, the Congress party, and the same Congress party was also ruling in almost all the states in India. So our constitutional scheme was working in such a manner that there was a same party ruling at the center, same party ruling in the states as well. But then with the emergence of the regional political parties, we also saw the emergence of coalition politics. One of India's foremost psephologists, Yogendra Yadav, says, when people were voting in 1960s and 1970s and 1980s, people were voting in assembly elections as if they were choosing the prime minister. But now we have seen a shift. From 1990s onwards, people are voting in parliamentary elections as if they are choosing a chief minister. So that is the shift that we have seen. We have seen a shift in our democratic polity. Let's look at the answer. Adopted in the aftermath of partition, our federal system is designed to have a strong center or quasi-federal character where the center has wide-ranging powers, including the imposition of president's rule. While this was necessary in 1947, this quasi-federal character has proved limited in its ability to curtail the central overreach, especially with single-party dominant national governments. And this highlights the urgency of reform. Because now we have seen more and more central interference in the state politics. For example, the current Prime Minister, he directly interacts with the IAS officers in various states and gets the centrally sponsored schemes implemented through them. So this is what many people call the Modi way of functioning in a federal polity, where there is more and more tilt in favor of the center. The role of the governor and the relevance of central powers like president's rule, as they have evolved in the contemporary politics, they need interrogation and existing mechanisms for representing state interest, whether through Rajya Sabha or strengthening NDC so that they can serve as adequate checks against New Delhi. NDC, National Development Council, this was the body which was supposed to approve the 5-yearly plans. And this NDC was represented by chief ministers of all states, including Delhi and Puducherry, which are the union territories. And this NDC was viewed as one of the most important federal body which should strengthen center-state relation. But now this NDC is at the verge of the death. We don't know what happens to this NDC because now we have seen an emergence of Niti Aayog. And Niti Aayog is basically a think tank. Niti Aayog is basically a grouping of technocrats, which basically suggest policies, indexes to various state governments and the center. So this is basically a technocratic body. This is not a political body. Institutional innovations such as Niti Aayog and the GST Council that now dominate the center-state relations. India today has a new framework for negotiating center-state relations. By design, these councils are technocratic spaces, and these are charged with developing common policy frameworks which can be best illustrated in the one nation, one tax slogan. For example, when GST was introduced, the slogan was given one nation, one tax. What is missing in Niti Aayog and GST Council is the political touch, is the political deliberation. And with these innovations, political scientist Ajay Kumar Singh says, we are moving towards a national federalism where choices are negotiated by Delhi bureaucrats rather than through political accommodation. Reports of committees such as Sarkaria, Punchi Commission are gathering dust and ought to be open to look for clues to reshape our polity in favor of a federal character. The idea of federal polity that is respectful of India's myriad differences is intrinsic to the idea of India. With increased political decentralization, according to Siddaramaiah, the former Chief Minister of Karnataka, India was ripe to evolve from Union of States, which is how India is mentioned under Article 1. India, that is Bharat, shall be a Union of States. So Siddaramaiah thought that we are evolving from Union of States to Federation of States. Instead, according to Yamini Iyer, the president of Center for Policy and Research, she argues that over the past 4 years, we have seen a worrying trend towards centralization that is striking at the very heart of our federal principles. It is now up to India's motley crew of pragmatic opposition parties whose very existence is a tribute to India's robust federalism, because these opposition parties, which is a group of regional political parties, they have evolved thanks to federal character of Indian constitution, and they should challenge this centralization and reassert the federal idea. This ought to be the glue that binds the Mahagathbandhan together, otherwise India's democracy is in danger. That's how your conclusion should be. But some of you might argue that why are we writing about Mahagathbandhan, why we are writing about the opposition political parties, because that's what the question demands. Question demands there is an urgent need for a renewed political debate on federalism, and that is how the answer to this question should look like. That is it from our newspaper analysis today. Thank you for being with us. Have a great day.